Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Stephen Fraley. I'm the chair of the undergraduate photography department here at SVA. I am also involved in this relatively new publication called Dear Dave, which is for sale in the lobby at a very reasonable price. It's published 3 times a year. We have these conversations every now and then. On October 28th at 7 p.m., we will also have a conversation between Eleanor Carucci and between Susan Bright, so please mark your calendars. It's a great honor and privilege to have Darius and Todd here this evening, 2 gentlemen from San Francisco, known for their charisma and generosity, among other things. By way of introduction, as you probably know, Darius Hymes has been a director at the Frankel Gallery in San Francisco since 2011. He was a co-founder of Radius Books and the founding editor of Photo Eye Booklist. He has written for Aperture, Blind Spot, Bookforum, and Bomb, and his most recent title, Publisher Photography Book, was published in 2011. Todd Hido has had 6 monographs. There might be more, but as far as I could count, it was 6. 6 monographs devoted to his work. He is represented by the Bruce Silverstein Gallery in New York, the Rose Gallery in Santa Monica, the Stephen Wirtz Gallery in San Francisco. His new book is called Excerpts from Silver Meadows. His work is in the collection of the George Eastman House in Rochester, the Guggenheim and the Whitney Museum of American Art here in New York, and the LA County Museum of Art, among many other venues. So without any further delay, please give a big hand to Darius Hymes and Todd Hido.
I first became aware of Todd's work, appropriately enough for the 2 of us, through a book. It was 2001, and Nazreli Press had just released his first monograph titled House Hunting. The photographs in the book are atmospheric and depict middle-class homes and small-town motels, mostly shot at night. There are lights shining from within, and the occasional solitary street light illuminates a dirty pile of snow, a broken-down car, a fenced-in yard. We're neither too close as viewers nor too far from the apparent subject. There are no humans depicted in these photographs, and that's a key point to part of this conversation we're going to have tonight. His second book, Outskirts, released a year later, was brilliantly executed and, without a sense of repetition from house hunting, followed the same visual course. For that first volume, A.M. Holmes wrote the following. He drives at night looking for a vacancy, an empty castle, 4 walls and a roof, a place to hole up, to lie down, to lay low. This is the place where something happened. Things went wrong. There are marks, traces, pieces left behind, evidence. These are houses of the dispossessed, repossessed, foreclosed. This is what remains, abandoned echo. When I first read that, I was really struck by these 3 phrases: a place to hole up, to lie down, to lay low. Those are potent phrases in English. They directly imply characters, maybe criminal, maybe misfits. They are lines out of novels and movies. They are things people do when they don't want to be seen. That implication in relation to Todd's photographs was revealing to me and stuck in my mind. In 2006, after a couple of more books and some smaller side projects, and a lot of critical acclaim, Todd published a book called Between the Two. Here, for the first time, he included photographs of people, mostly women, carefully woven into the fabric and sequence of the book. This completely changed the reading of the work for me. In talking with Todd then about that book, he revealed that he'd been making photographs of various acquaintances and models throughout his photographic life, and definitely from grad school on. What I also came to learn is that Todd has a voracious visual appetite and is a hungry student of how photography, throughout the 20th century, not only permeated our homes on an amateur level in the form of snapshots and family albums, but was used to sell us everything, and through popular culture, to reinforce certain sexual and emotional dynamics between men and women. Last year, Todd published a small zine-like book called Nymph Daughters. It came out in Japan, had very limited distribution, and was very different than his other books. This was a departure from the large-scale monographs he'd been publishing, and it brought him back to some of his sequencing experiments from graduate school. This book started with 2 photos. The first image of a found studio portrait of a mother made in the 1950s, and another found archival newspaper photograph taken by a reporter of the aftermath of an auto accident. Heido put the portrait at the front of the book and the car crash at the back, and worked to connect the 2 using his own photographs. The implication here of a narrative was strong and in many ways explicit. But these are neither novels nor films. This is why I have this quote from Louis Baltz up. Without dialogue or an omniscient narrator telling us what's going on in someone's mind, our imagination fills in the gaps between one photograph and the next. And the turning of one page after another, followed by another, is a physical act that is designed to elicit connections. Those connections are going to be different for every person looking at the work. And it is a unique quality of a photo book in relation to these other 2 mediums of literature and film. So before I turn the stage over to Todd, who's going to give a brief presentation, and then we'll have this conversation, I want to end on this observation. Our popular notion of the photographer is someone who acts as a documentarian or as witness or truth teller. And that's true for a nonfiction type of photography. But as the title of this evening implies, Todd is working in the vicinity of narrative. And I would add that that narrative is a fictional one. So I'm going to show you 2 short sequences as finished books that Todd has put together. And the first is going to be part of his newest monograph, which is Excerpts from Silver Meadows. And the second will be the entirety of Nymph Daughters. And then I'll turn it over to Todd. So this is Excerpts from Silver Meadows. Please join me in welcoming Todd.
Thanks a lot for coming. I really appreciate Stephen having us. You know, and when I first saw Dear Dave, I was like, I love this magazine, you know, and he sent them to me, so I'm very happy every time one comes. It's really a beautiful magazine. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a slide talk. I'm just going to kind of do an abbreviated version of a slide talk that I often do, that I've actually been working on for probably I think I graduated from the museum school in like 1991, and so it's kind of been, I've been adding to this slideshow ever since then. Actually, I'll stand because I think that's, you can see me better, right? But don't look at me, look at the screen. I taught a workshop at Aperture this weekend, and we were recording things for like possible publication in my text, because I can, if you ask me to write something, I could never write it, but I can talk for 7 hours, 2 days in a row. But so I'm so used to this microphone and talking that it's a little bit odd to be doing this right now. So anyway, but here I am. So I grew up in Ohio, Kent, Ohio, and it was kind of this sort of place that was it was kind of like a cornfield built in a suburb, and which is was kind of, but it had this little boulevard running through the middle called Silver Meadows Boulevard, and that was, you know, quickly referred to as, it became Silver Ghettos Boulevard. And this, I was looking at this map one day just to see what's it look like from above, and I lived on Denise Drive, and then you can see on the other side there's like houses and there's apartments, and then my mom just let us do whatever we wanted. She worked all day long, my dad worked all day long, and we just did whatever we wanted. And then she said, you can do anything you want, but don't go to the apartments, you know. And so of course that's where all the good stuff was, and that's where we spent most of our time once we kind of got over running through streams and in the woods and stuff like that. But it was a unique place because it was we literally had, like, you know, there was woods, rural area, suburbs, and then all this other stuff happening in the apartments that was really kind of, at that time, exciting. And then it's interesting, this slide, the reason I'm hanging on this is because it's funny that almost everything in my work somehow or another came from a memory that occurs within this map. And whenever I go, I've been all over to photograph, and then wherever I go to photograph, I almost always end up finding something that reminds me of home, you know, whether it's the kind of building or the architecture or like the weather or something like that. And so it's sort of interesting. And then that little Marilyn Monroe there, is my babysitter's name was officially Marilyn Monroe, you know, for real. It wasn't the Marilyn Monroe, but her name was Marilyn Monroe, so that's why she's there. And then this is me when I was probably 11. You can see that Terry Richardson copied my style a long time ago, you know. And then this is one of my first photographs. I used to, and then we'll come back to this because this is actually something that's sort of interesting and important. This is a picture that I made with an Instamatic camera that my mom had gotten me, and I think this was not too long after we moved into this house, but you know, we didn't have like tons of furniture, but this wasn't like moving day. This was like, you know, a little bit later, but and then. Another thing that got me kind of like, I took pictures like that, like, you know, to record my things and to photograph stuff. And then, but what really got me sort of interested in photography was I used to be a BMX bicycle racer, actually a champion, believe it or not. I was the 4-time state champion of Ohio. And that's actually me riding. And that was really, because that got me interested, and because I wanted to become a photographer, and I wanted to move to California and photograph my friends who raced. It's interesting, it turns out that I never did it quite like that, but I do live in California, so it's interesting. Other things got me there. But, and then just a really I'm kind of doing an abbreviated version of this talk because what we want to do is save plenty of time for Darius and I to have a conversation. But eventually what I did was I lived in Pittsburgh for a small amount of time, and then I realized there was more to photography than I learned at this one little 2-year school. And then I ended up going to moving to Boston to go to the Boston Museum School, and that was an incredible experience there. And that's when kind of my eyes opened to like the world of photography as I know it. And I had teachers there that I think all of my teachers, every single one of them either had Aaron Siskin or Harry Callahan as their teacher. And so they kind of taught a very specific sort of way of doing things there, and that was the way that I did things. I made little prints, you know, little small black and white prints, and never really did any color. I personally didn't do any color. And then so I did that, and then I worked as an assistant for a couple of years, and then eventually the time had come to like go to graduate school. And so I went to California. And I ended up going to the California College of the Arts. That's what they call it now. It's funny, it used to be called the California College of Arts and Crafts, but they got rid of crafts. But then ironically, crafts is super cool again. But I don't think they'll change it back. So it's sort of funny. But anyway, so a couple of firsts. This is the first night shot that I did. And how I got started doing night photography was just totally random. I was out, like I get started in anything. It's totally random. And I was just kind of like out at night, driving around, and I saw this picture, and I thought I'd like to record it. And I remember from this reciprocity failure assignment that I had way back in beginning photo, if you expose it for a really long time, it'll just work, you know. And so that's kind of that's what I did. And then so there's shot number one of how I got into night photography. And then here's the other picture. I kind of turned the camera around and then shot back that way. And then what's kind of curious about this is that I remember so clearly, as soon as I turned my attention to that house, the people in the house with that light on up there, they noticed me, you know, and it wasn't that they were looking at me, but they could feel me there, you know, looking at it. And it's kind of it's been something I've been dodging for a long time, is like when I take a picture, you know, instead of looking at the people's house, like I look like over this way, because my energy is pointing somewhere else, you know, because otherwise they'll spot me right away. But so anyway, but that's the first, you know, the first and second night shots. And then, like I mentioned, I had done all these little tiny black and white prints. And when I got to California, everybody around me was doing large color work. This was in '94 is when I started. And so my work, you know, started to change then. And so this is one of the first color pictures I did. And what I like about it, obviously, is that there's no color in it, or it's very muted. And like, this is not desaturate and all this stuff. Everything you're seeing in my slideshow, actually everything in my slideshow except for one or two pictures, is a totally analog picture. And they're all printed in the darkroom in one way or another, mostly by me. The first prints are always made by me or somebody like standing right next to me saying, hey, make that a little bit more magenta, why I make this one more yellow. So everything is it's done by me. And then here's the second color picture I did. And with this one, I discovered something that was sort of, the thing that I discovered here is that there's an artificiality to all of this that I liked. You know, that this kind of looked like a model, and that there's something, you could take a picture of something real, and it could look maybe like it wasn't real, or maybe look like it was set up, or it was a set or something. So I found that to be kind of curious. And then in the tradition of sort of exploring, like, you know, I remember in graduate school, we had these assignments where I took this class with Larry Sultan, who I'll talk about a little bit later, and a filmmaker. It was co-taught by a filmmaker and Larry, a photographer, about, it was called the Narrative Workshop, and it was a class that was pretty much about just like making things and making narratives out of all kinds of different methods. Like, you know, we cut up newspapers and then resequence them, or we would do a bunch of different little like assignment-based things, which was kind of interesting for a graduate student to be cutting up newspapers and getting assignments, but it was really cool. I liked that. And then ultimately, I was doing this one project where I needed an establishing shot for this narrative that I had made of these people. I had these people, and then I had to have a container for them to be in, or a place where they were coming from, or where all this drama was occurring in. And so I went out and made a house at night. And this was something that I also kind of really sort of just stumbled across. You know, I was just like out. I love to drive around and make pictures. That's like one of the most fun things ever, is just driving around with no specific purpose, just to make pictures. And so I was out and do that. And then I was happy to discover that this place there was a car dealership across the way, right across the street from it. And so it had all this light that was like just shining right on the house. And so that's why it's kind of lit so perfectly. But it was an interesting discovery. So I made this picture. I was using color then, so it started the color houses at night. And then I ended up going out, and I finished my assignment. I did that, and then basically I ended up going out one other night, and I said, hey, there's another house at night that looks interesting, and I photographed it. And then I discovered this really great discovery, that out in just south of San Francisco, there was a neighborhood that's actually built by the Levitt brothers, like their company. And so I'm the kind of person that, like, I notice the details of things like very much, and so the fact that there was a East Coast home builder that made a neighborhood in the West Coast was really super unique, and it was perfect because it was exactly the kind of thing that was like the homes looked just like the East, and so I kind of had this like place 20 minutes from where I came from that could go and find. And then the kick with this that was really amazing is it was right on the edge of the cliff near the ocean, and it was always foggy in the summertime. So you would go to this place, and it was like one of the weirdest, most surreal kind of places ever to photograph. And I'll show you some more of those in a minute. And then I'm putting this in here because I think it's important to note that, like, I'm the kind of photographer that I don't get an idea and do a project and then complete my project. And I don't usually have an idea when I'm going out to take pictures. I just take pictures and then sort them out later. And a lot of times I'm working on 2, 3, 4, 5 things at the same time. And then at the same time I was, going to photograph these houses, I was also like, I would make a picture like this. Like this is my bed at Christmas in Ohio. I think the first year I came back from graduate school, I came home and I woke up and I saw that picture. I saw that and I was like, wow. And I had my mom, I said, Mom, go get my camera. I had her go get it for me because I didn't want to disturb this situation because it was kind of perfect. And that's how that picture was made. So it's just important to note that, like, in a slideshow like this, everything looks all organized and you look like you've got it all together, but like I'm sort of probably as scattered as most of you guys are. And then here's my tribute to Hiroshi Sugimoto, but in my basement, my family's living room that same year. And then just kind of furthering the idea about how I work. Like, I see that how I work is that I'm working on this big archive of pictures, and I kind of I've got them all categorized. And when I make pictures, I just kind of like make these little prints, and then I end up putting them in to these different sections, like houses at night, landscapes, portraits, 126 pictures, 126 houses, 126 landscapes, 126 portraits, and then I just categorize them. And I like to keep things organized like this, and then I can, when I'm working on a new project or I have something new to do, I can kind of go and look at what I have and then pull out the pictures in sequence and then start to make something, on a table or on, often an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And I just sort of like, that's how I've always sort of worked, and I enjoy that. That like shuffling it around physically part. And so after like doing a couple of these, the reason I didn't jump back into that slide is I think it's really important to know that, like, I don't just like, I didn't get an idea and go do it, it took a long time to figure out, like, I make a picture and then, like, a year and a half later you're like, oh, hey, this should be, maybe you should do more of these things, and so I would go out and do more, and then I started to realize, and as you do more and you take more pictures, you realize that you figure out what it is you're looking for and what you're up to, and then, or what do you like about it. Like in this particular one, what I liked was this is in 1995, I think. And then, so there's two people, these are not two people like on their iPads in their bedrooms alone. These are two people watching television in the house alone with the lights out. And then I started to think about, well, why are they not together? What's going on in their house that they're both watching TV in the dark, like in different rooms? So I kind of, that's the kind of thing that I started to think about. And that's what I see when I look at these places. I'm wondering, like, well, what's the person's life like, and why is it like that? And then the visual clues come from things like, what's going on in the window, or even like these tire tracks on the, actually not tire tracks, they're skid marks on the in the crosswalk, which would indicate that it's a neighborhood where they do these things called sideshows in Oakland or in California, and so it's hectic there. We can say that. And then a picture like this, why? I remember I was driving down the freeway, south of Salt Lake City, and I saw this, and I remember that light on the snow, and I was like, man, it was really bright inside, and it's like, what's going on in here, And is it you just don't know, but it seems seedy, so I liked it. So I remember got off the highway, and then I went back and found that house. I love that picture. And then the thing about my pictures, I think and really all pictures are like this, but I think mine function in this way, I know mine function in this way, is that, I feel like the meaning of the image resides in the viewer. And, I might have been looking for something, or I might have been suggesting something, but, somebody's going to always look at it and see something, whatever they want to see. And so this is a young girl who's on a little field trip to SF MoMA, and she was looking at something, and she's basically saying that, this picture reminds me of a happy and warm family. The picture seems very quiet, and only the house's light is on. Maybe it's on Christmas Day or a family day. The whole family just sits there and has dinner. I fixed her like she's only a kid, so we can fix her stuff. But it's interesting how that, she's like, she saw something happy in that, and somebody might look at a picture and be like, oh my God, that's that messed up place that I used to live in. I couldn't wait to leave. So I love that about pictures. I think that's really important, that the meaning of a picture is just like, there is no one meaning of any photograph, and that they fluctuate out the world, and I think that's important. And I work with that, I know that, and don't try to nail anything down. In fact, I don't title anything. It's all just a number, like a specific, it's a vague number, like this one is number 2690. And that number comes from the roll of film. That's the 960th roll of film I shot. So that's how they do it. So here's a picture that became the cover of the book. And then just in terms of how these were made, is that these were made all by me, just by myself. I don't have an assistant that goes with me. I just drive around, look for stuff, and then when I see something I like, I'll find it. And I remember this one in particular, I drove around for probably 5 hours, and it was I was ready to go home, and you turn the corner, and you're like, whoa, look at that. And it's like the thing you're looking for, right around that corner, but you just had to go a little bit farther. And then in terms of how it works, I don't ask permission to shoot the houses, because people would, in this day and age, people are like, they think that you're up to no good, or they want to see, you want to buy something. I had a job for the New York Times one time, I remember, and they had me do one of these pictures, and they needed permission, and everyone thought I was trying to sell subscriptions to the Sunday New York Times. And they're like, no, we don't want the paper. And I'm like, no, I want to give you money, to take this picture of your house. So anyway, and then when I'm doing it, it's just, these are 6 to 10 minute long exposures, and I'm back across the street on the left-hand side. And then after being there for a few minutes, after 10, 15 minutes, you realize you can get closer. And then I went over and then got moved in and then got more comfortable, and then ended up finding the picture that I liked the best. But that's a typical contact sheet, kind of. I always hang back first. And then this ended up becoming the cover of my first book, House Hunting. And then this is something that's important to know about my work, is that I photograph like a documentarian, but I print like a painter. And when I'm working, and when I'm shooting, I don't like to mess with things. I think that I really, honestly, I prefer to find what I'm looking for instead of creating it. And then when it comes to portraiture, that changes obviously, because unless you're like Winogrand cruising down the street and snapping away with your Leica, you're pretty much, if a person knows you're taking their picture, it's already set up. So that's a whole nother story, but we'll get to it in a minute. But and then this is this is so unimpressive, but it took me a long time to do that. In the darkroom, I would just make all these different colors and try to decide which one I wanted, and then I would end up picking the next one, picking the one that works, or often picking the one that I needed for something like this. Like when I had always intended, after the first time I showed this work, I had 7 pictures on a wall together. And then after I ended up getting more of them, I realized that I needed to have, they couldn't all be like blue or orange or yellow or whatever. I needed to really kind of balance out the colors. And so a lot of times I'm sort of looking for something that lends itself towards being pushed to a color. I don't ever create the color, but sometimes if it's, I'll enhance it, like that there's an orange one that, it had that sodium vapor glow, but I kind of pushed it towards a burnt orange instead. And so this is an installation of these images at the National Museum of Film, Photography and Television in Bradford, UK. And so this is 22 pictures. And then this is an interesting thing, especially for students, is when do you know when you're done with a project? You know, like I had a book published on this. I had another book published on this called Outskirts, which was additional photographs. And then I probably had 15 shows. And then, but I kept, and then there was this show occurred, but then I kept doing it. And then it turned into this, which is by far the very best installation I've ever done, probably in my life, of any of my photographs. This is at this incredible place called Pier 24 in San Francisco, which is a relatively new, it's probably been open for 3 years at the most. And it's the kind of place where they do expansive exhibitions. There's 28,000 square feet of exhibition space. It's really kind of unbelievable. And what they like to do is they like to focus on an artist. And so they'll give you, like they'll say, instead of putting up some of your pictures, they'll say, here's a room of your pictures. And so then that kind of like way of doing it, they enabled me to like lay this out and make this thing happen. The slide makes it kind of look like a little bit more, it looks small from this slide, but when you're standing in there, it's like you're surrounded by the images. And these are all 20 by 24 prints. And they're all, and this is all also, the other thing I should point out is that all this stuff is laid out by me. 99% of the time when you see something on mine, I like laid it out. And I have two modes. I'm like either all in or I just sit back and let somebody do their thing. And then it's important to know the difference. But like this was a case where the person that the director that runs the museum, Chris McCall, who's a friend of mine, he said, we'll just let Todd do what he wants to do, and you'll see how, you know. And I came in with this map, and they're like, and they just hung it. So it was it worked really well. But that's interesting. Like, so, like, you know, after doing all that stuff, you know, like, how do you know when you're done with something? Is when you stop getting out of the car to take the picture, you know, or when you stop seeing that thing and then being motivated to pull your camera out and make an image. And I have to say that there's, you know, that one, the earlier one was 22 pictures. I mean, it was like, yeah, 22 pictures. This is 45, and this is, you know, there's obviously no horizontals because they would have messed up the grid. But it's interesting, like you just, you know, and then, but I haven't taken one of these pictures probably in a year and a half, you know. So anyway, but then in terms of like influences, the things that I love the things about photography where there's just such overlap sometimes between people, and there's a real kinship between photographers or painters and drawers. And so there's a picture I did in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then I saw in this Robert Adams book this little picture that he had pulled out of Edward Hopper's. It was like an etching of the lonely house, which I think is, you know, I love the relationship, just the little house sitting there by itself. And then furthering that, you know, this is a picture by a woman, actually not a woman, a girl, a high school girl named Hannah Antons, who drew, my work was on view at the North Carolina Museum of Art. I hope I got that right. I think it's the North Carolina Museum of Art. And they had, you know, high school students go in there and draw and pick pieces and, you know, make something from that. And, you know, so there's like, you know, I love that. Her painting is beautiful. But I love that there's a kinship between the three of us, you know, and I'm sure other people, but that does that. And then Robert Adams has been a huge influence on my work. Stephen Shore and New Topographics. I'm going to kind of cruise through these a little bit more quickly. The Burton Hillebesher, I've always like adored their work. I'll never forget when somebody said, "Hey, you should check out this book in the library. It's called Water Towers. You know, it's in the reserved case." And then I went there and I just was like astounded. And Atget, I've always loved, Atget's been like just an endless influence. I love Atget because he's kind of like, he's the emotional Beschers. You know, he's got the repetition thing down, but he's like poetic. And I really like that about his work. And then Roy DeCarava was an accidental influence, really. I took this workshop once, and he was somebody canceled, and then had Roy DeCarava teach it, and I didn't know who that was because I was just this silly kid from Ohio. And but when I got there, he was like amazing, and he taught me how to print. And every time I would come into the darkroom, he'd be like, make it darker, you know, and print it darker. And I that's what I do. Sometimes that's my trick, just make it darker. So, but the thing that really I learned out of this picture was that Roy said he had walked around this corner, going to visit a friend, come out of the elevator, and then he stopped and he saw this and he stopped dead in his tracks and he ran home, got his tripod, and then he came back and he made this photograph. And he said that he had to shoot it because it reminded him exactly of the hallway that he would walk down to as a child to go to his apartment, you know. And that really kind of rung a bell with me, because I think that of all the places I go, like we talked about, like I'm always looking for something that reminds me of home. You know, I'm looking for something that reminds me of where I came from. Other influences, Diane Arbus. I mean, I love her unrelenting darkness. It's just wonderful. And then this is an amazing picture. And then Larry Sultan. You know, I could go on. I could do a whole lecture about Larry Sultan, and I won't, because I feel like I talk about him more than I should probably, but he was one of my most important teachers. And I remember when I got to graduate school, he was, we kind of just hit it off immediately, you know, both photographically and also just as friends. And I was his teaching assistant and his assistant for a while, and we just had a lot, we've exchanged a lot of things in our work. But this is a picture that he had given me of his dad on the bed. And then this is a picture he took of me. This is me and his wife, Kelly, and we're actually this is like in Men's Vogue, believe it or not. I'm in Men's Vogue. And 1994 probably, 96. And we were on the set of the Valley, you know, the pornography films, where he did the behind the scenes pictures. And they had us, like, they sent some clothing out and a stylist, and they said, hey, just have everybody wear these like cool clothes and then just shoot everything, you know. And then that's what they did. So here's the picture. But that was an interesting lesson in like how an editorial project can turn into 10 years of your work, you know. Like for him, he had gotten assigned to go to Los Angeles. When that movie Boogie Nights came out, he had gotten an assignment from the British magazine, The Telegraph, to go and photograph behind the scenes, like what was it really like? You know, the British always want to know what's going on in LA. They're like, what's it really like? And so they sent him out there, and then he did that, and then he was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then after his wife came and checked it out and said, yeah, you can do this, which is really, I'm sure that's what was going on. Kelly's a wonderful person. She's always up for adventure. And he kept doing it for like, you know, 8 more years after that, and made a book called The Valley. It's interesting. Editorial work, I think, is really great for art photographers. Like, it kind of gets them out of their studio and out in the world. And then another person that I'm really influenced by and have a really good kinship with is Jim Goldberg, who also lives in San Francisco. I don't know, I should have mentioned, I'm sure you might know, Larry Sultan passed away about almost 4 years ago. It's a really sad loss that he was one of the greats of all photography, like just an amazing person. But Jim is in San Francisco, and we're always, you know, looking at pictures and, you know, comparing notes and, you know, try to like see what each other is doing. So Jim's a really big influence on my work. And then there's just things like, you know, you've discovered these things. Like I found this picture of this on this Plow and Hearth catalog, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of like my pictures. And then it's like, well, maybe not, you know. And but it's kind of like, and then I started to think about like, well, that's interesting. My pictures are really just a cliche kind of thing, and they're sort of like houses at night with lights on, you know. And it's like, what is it about that? It's like, well, it draws people in, you know, and it's interesting. And I like that I can use that usually warm and fuzzy thing to kind of like lure somebody into this sort of strange place. And I love this one because, first of all, who has neon green curtains? Like, those are pretty cool. And then there's the grate has been cut out. Somebody either tried to get in or out of that house. But I love those. It's all in the details. And and then here's me taking pictures, and then this is what I go do when I'm done. And if I do well, actually, it's funny. I used to have this thing. It's like, if I take a good picture, I can like go home and relax. Is what I would actually do. But I would drive around projects. This is not me, and this is not what I do. But this is. I bring this up because like oftentimes people will say, "Oh, your work is so voyeuristic," and well, first of all, I think voyeurism is awesome, and then number two is. Like my work isn't really that way. All I do is I set up a blank stage, and you fill that stage in with whatever it is you're looking at, you're thinking of. And because I think what's interesting is how my work functions is, if you think about it, there's nothing, you've seen nothing in those windows. They're blank. It's light and curtains. It's smoke and mirrors, and anything that you've thought about those homes, you created or you thought of that. And I try to really be like non-judgmental in my photography, and sometimes and yes, I do photograph things that are like maybe more like ragged around the edges, because that's just that's where I came from, ragged around the edges, and that's what speaks to me. I've tried to go to photograph like in wealthy neighborhoods, but they're just boring, all the good stuff's been like, it's behind the scenes. Anyway, this is, Hitchcock and then Mary Alpern, who did this book down on Wall Street called Dirty Windows. But I just kind of bring those up because I think voyeurism is something that's interesting to talk about and think about, but just to realize that everything you think of is something you thought of. And then here's a really interesting thing about influence, which I think it's wonderful. I think things come around like this, is that I remember, actually Larry was the first person to show me. He's like, you should read some Raymond Carver. And I'm like, okay. And I read Carver, and I was blown away by his stuff. And the thing that Larry really kind of pointed out to me in my work is that he said, he's like, you're photographing homes and houses, but your work is all about relationship. Your work is about home and family. And then I started to see that. And then another thing that I didn't have a slide up, but I remember there was a very specific show, and that's where I found out about Larry, was in the show at MoMA in '91 called The Pleasures and Terrors of Domestic Comfort. And I love that show. There was something about it, because there was just all kinds of crazy stuff about home and family and people and relationships, and it was a really amazing exhibit. And that's where I first saw Larry's work, was in that. But then, so Raymond Carver ends up that I had used a couple of pieces of his, poems of his in my books, because they just were the perfect poetic thing to put in there, and simple. And then years later, they called me and they said they were interested in using my images to. They were going to redo his covers because the books had become 25 years old, and they wanted to relaunch them, to a younger audience. And so, I would have said to them, yes, you can use anything you want for free, but I knew better than that. And so we ended up working together, and we figured out, which ones to pick. And this is probably, this is one of my greatest photographic accomplishments, to have these covers be my pictures. This is as good as a show at MoMA to me, because this is reintroducing a younger generation, hopefully, to Raymond Carver. And I think that's interesting. So this one I love. This is what we talk about when we talk about love. That's what I was talking about. So that's that. This is behind the scenes. This one would have been wonderful for that. This is a mock-up, but obviously nobody's going to buy this crappy mattress. This mattress doesn't say "buy me," but it would have been a good cover. And so I'm gonna just quickly jump through a couple of things. Foreclosed homes. I did a whole other project on foreclosed homes, kind of concurrently with the houses at night. And I'm going to just go really quickly through this stuff, just so you can see the images. Almost all these things are on my website if you wanted to go back and look at them, which is just Todd at toddhido.com. toddhido.com, that's it. And my name is Hido, like Fido. That's the good way to remember it, not like it's, everyone always mixes it up. How I got into these houses to photograph is, I had this friend in LA, and he was, his dad was a realtor, and he had told me, he's like, because he'd seen some empty houses, like, there's some foreclosed homes you should check out. And this is in 1995 or 96. And way back before, I mean, I remember I would show this and people, I'd have to explain what foreclosure meant, which I sadly don't have to explain now. But we would go to these places, and I would go to these places and photograph, and we would call this guy named Yale Kecklin, who used to work for the Home Savings of America, and say, yeah, we want to show the house on blah, blah, blah street. We got your new fax, and we'd steal them off his dad's desk and say, we want to show the house on blah, blah, blah. And then he'd say, oh, it's HSA is the lockbox code. And then after doing it like 3 times, you're like, oh, it's always HSA for Home Savings of America. So I would just get the list and then cruise around LA with my Thomas guide. There was no iPhone map then. And just go to as many places as I could. And then this body of work is super small. There's, I think, 13 pictures that are good because I only found 13 places that spoke to me. They were either like too messed up or too cleaned up. And I liked the things that were in between like this, where there's those marks on the window, I mean on the door, where people, like every time they close the door, they never wipe that part off. And that's the history of someone going out that door or coming in the door. Or things like this. Like, I don't set any of this up because like I could never think of something as good as this. This is perfect. This is perfection. And I think Walker Evans would like that one. Walker Evans is a huge influence of mine too. And then there's this. And then sadness is interesting. There's something about why is sadness interesting, and why do we constantly gravitate towards stories of tragic things or tragedy, or it's an interesting thing, but it catches my attention, that's for sure. This is a picture that I can barely look at because my kid, I imagine my son looking at that, and it would be terrible. And then Nan Golden, who took this picture of herself to remind herself to never let this happen again, and her boyfriend had hit her. And then other influences of mine, across the board. I mean, Edward Hopper is an influence that could be across the board, for sure. Hitchcock and Hopper, all the way through my work. Mark Rothko, just simple color. Rachel White Reed. I love her work. She's brilliant. The rooms, the things that she's cast. And then after doing, these 2 projects of the homes and the landscapes, I wanted to do, the homes and the interiors, I wanted to start to think about landscapes. And so I went out and just started doing landscape photography. And then, I had this kind of picture, and I'd made this picture, which was an accidental image, which, as you can see, it becomes like all these other landscapes I've done. But sometimes you stumble onto things. And so I made this photograph through the window, and then I ended up using it in my book House Hunting as a break, kind of. It was like a picture. Everything was at night, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's this daytime photograph. And I liked that. It broke up the book just when you kind of needed it. With photography and sequencing, it's kind of like repetition's your enemy and your friend. And it's the kind of thing that you have to figure out how to balance those 2 things out. You got to be consistent enough, to be, you have to be repetition enough to be consistent, but not so consistent that you're boring. And so this is the kind of picture that I pop that in, and it's kind of and I still look at that sequence, and it's like, that's the perfect place for that picture. And so then, really quickly, I got this residency. After doing this, I had 2 books, and then I got this residency in Marseille to go photograph. And I was really excited because I'd never gone to France. I'd been to France, but I'd never gone to the south of France and stayed in a studio for a month. And no one had ever gave me a chance to, like, hey, you have a month-long studio, and we're going to give you some money and stuff like that. And so I went over there, and I did, and I started to shoot for a week, and I was just like, it was not working. And then I remember that it was also, this is October 2011. Not a good time to go somewhere, and overseas. And then I remember they were going to make a little book of this, and I was just thinking, like, God, I hate these pictures I'm making, and it's going to be a book. Like, I was like, no way, is this going to be my 3rd book? And so I basically one thing or another, I just ended up, because I had this big discovery, I'm like, my work is not in France, my work is in America. I'm like, and I was thinking about, I need to go to the places I photograph and the places that resonate with me, because I didn't grow up in France and it doesn't resonate in some way. So at that point in time, that's how I felt. I mean, I might feel differently now. I don't want to disqualify myself from any future residencies in other countries. But then I ended up going back. You know, I ended up like leaving. I gave them their money back and I went home. And then, ironically, as soon as I got home, my wife got pregnant with my kids, I think that day. It's kind of funny. Everything's meant to be a certain exact timing and everything. It was weird. But then I was into landscape photography. And so basically I started doing that, and I figured that out. I had those little landscapes. I had taken my 10 pictures I'd made that weren't houses at night, and then I just started to focus on landscape. And I just went out and did that. And then, you know, shot through the window, because that worked, you know, a couple times. And then I went on another trip, and then it really started to work. There was a very important trip I made to Washington State, which is East Washington, which I found this place that was exactly like it looked exactly like my Ohio, but it was only 2 hours away on an airplane, and there was a nonstop flight. This isn't them, this is another. I'll show you Washington again, but I just kind of went out and just kept making pictures. And then here's more it's a contact sheet from how my landscape stuff looks. I love photographers' contact sheets, because that's how they really work. And then, you know, I pair these daytime pictures with these nighttime pictures. And I liked a picture that looked like something had happened in that place. Like there was something either was going to happen there or it happened already. And that's kind of what I look for. And then just in terms of the way that book worked, there's two kinds of images. I think there's very straightforward pictures out of the car on a tripod. This is a Walker Evans picture that I love. This is one of the only Walker Evans I can think of where it's raining. And his friend Lincoln Kirsten told him that they were going to shoot architecture on a trip. And then he said, you know, Walker Evans was all bummed out in this hotel room, and he's like, well, Lincoln Kirsten said, you should photograph that. That's America. That's really interesting. And he shot this picture, and it's an anomaly, and it's one of the most poetic Evans pictures ever of that one. And then another poetic picture of America through a hotel room window. And this one, I think what's interesting about this is that this is Robert Frank, Butte, Montana, from The Americans. And what I love about this, and I think that this is at play in my work heavily, is that he's shooting through those curtains, you know, and me shooting through the windshield is like the curtains in this picture. You feel the presence of somebody on that holding the camera, you know, and I think that there's something about that makes it more intimate and sort of places you in a different context than this one, which is kind of documentary. It's one thing that Walker Evans said that I always thought. Walker Evans is the great documentary photographer, right? But really what he said about documentary was, he said, he said, there's no such thing as documentary, only documentary style, you know, which is, he was even aware that it was a style of photography, and that, you know, and that it was just, where is the truth? And this will come up, I think, when we talk in a little bit. But anyway, I like that about him. He knew what was going on. And then Robert Adams, which is, you know, again, lifelong influence of mine, Los Angeles Spring. I'm going to show this part, and then we're going to jump over to us having a conversation. Just a little bit about where I work. I'm always I'm always looking at pictures, and I have books open and things. And this is way back. This is my apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was right when I was an undergraduate. I'll just say I'm an undergraduate student, and then I was heavily influenced by Emmett Gowan, and I remember thinking I just wanted to be Emmett Gowan, you know, and he was just my hero, and that was great, because he's a good person to have as a hero. He's one of the ones that won't let you down, I think. And I remember that's my picture on the right, and that's Edith on the left in his book. And I remember, I put that picture in there just to kind of, well, am I close to being that good, you know? And I can see now that I was lacking a little bit, and then another thing that about, I'm super influenced by books. I got books everywhere. Like I think I need to get some new shelves. I need to build new shelves in my house because there's too many books. But this is one of my other places in California. During graduate school, and just like I love to have books and pictures and my pictures and other people's pictures all around. This one I actually love. This is a picture in my studio now. That's like a good picture of a picture. But I'm so lucky I have this incredible sunlight that comes into my studio every day. The West Coast light just sets in my office through the hills. But it looks just like that. And then I surround myself with pictures. I'm like, that's my medicine cabinet. Like I used to have these extra Xeroxes, and I'm like, I'm gonna hang them up right over here, and I like any closet door in my house, you open it, it's filled with images. Because I'm kind of a minimalist. I don't want tons of stuff everywhere, but like when you open the curtain or the closet or whatever, it's like it all falls out. And so that's that. And that's my studio right now. And then those white frames, those are little 8x10 frames I had made that are basically like little maquettes for like my larger work. I like to look at things kind of finished, and I had those made, and I could just pop my pictures in there and kind of see what they look like, framed and finished, but in a smaller size. But you can see there's like my pictures and other people's pictures and paintings and drawings and postcards. And then I'm always doing this. I'm printing and shuffling. I'm a shuffler. I definitely I poke around. Sometimes I'm like hours and hours. I'm like, what did I just do? Like for those 3 hours, and I just moved things around a little bit. It's just very weird. And then if I'm not at home, I do it on my computer. This is this is a picture of my assistant Amanda back in the olden days when we actually were able to go take pictures during the daytime. I remember we had this deal going where it's like, if it's raining, so it was when I didn't have her working all the time. I'm like, well, if I didn't want to book her, because I'm like, well, what if it's going to rain? I'll want to go take pictures that day. And she's like, well, if it rains, I'll go with you. And I'm like, okay, but only if you're in the picture, And so I have these these clothes from like Goodwill, and like she would dress up and run down and then run down the street like in the rain, and I would capture her. It was fun. We used to have a good time doing that stuff. But I love combining pictures, and I'm always working on kind of doing that. These are just a few images that I had these two pictures I took on the right, and I needed like a protagonist in the middle. I'm a huge fan of Tumblr. Like I'll spend 3 hours shifting pictures and then 3 hours a night like looking at pictures on Tumblr, and it's like Tumblr is like evidence that there's a God, I think. And they just better not change anything. It's an amazing, I love Tumblr. And so I print out things and I look at things, and it'll this is a stand-in for I needed a bad guy, And you'll see it later on, and then we look at some other work that I had a bad guy I filled in, and then, or maybe I needed a girl with a shotgun instead, And this is just stuff I make these print them out, and they're placeholders sometimes. Moving things around, shuffling, that stuff. So this kind of leads into my other work. So I think I'm gonna pause right here, and then we're going to shift the stage over to the other side, and I can have the slides run in the background while we're talking.
Todd, thank you.
You're welcome. It's funny to do this. He's like, this is my really good friend, and we usually sit around my table and just hang out, but now we're here.
Todd truly, he really does have piles of books everywhere, and this sense of shuffling and sequencing, and what you just said about I needed a bad guy, I needed a girl with a shotgun, I needed a landscape. How do you see yourself as an author?
That's a good question. I guess I am an author, but I guess I don't really it's funny, I guess I am an author, but I kind of don't think of it in that, author is a grand term,
Right.
And I'm just a photographer. But maybe I am an author. You know.
If you are an author, is it first person? Is it a third person narrative? Like how do you position that in your mind?
I think that it fluctuates back and forth. I think that there's something about the way that I'm, you know, we'll look at this, we'll look at the slides from the, whoops.
Is there a way to put that on auto at all, or
I
no?
think we could do that, but I'll just press the button.
Okay, that sounds good.
But the thing that, in this new work, I think that the thing about the newest book, which I want to just kind of get to, but is that I think that in terms of the way that it all fluctuates, because there's certain things in there that are autobiographical. There's like portions of it, and then there's parts of it that are totally about something else, you know, or like, you know, would have like CNN running in the background, you know, and I would hear these stories about all these terrible things in the world, and like they definitely like filtered into my work. So I'd be like making a sequence of pictures, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's about that like event that happened, you know, recently. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, like the things that have occurred, like when I'm making this book, is like that Sandusky case, you know, Casey Anthony, you know, school shootings, like, you know, and then probably 20 other things we can name. But those are like big things that occurred, like, you know, over the course of me making this book. And I'm kind of like, I like white noise, and so CNN is like, it's just, if my kids aren't watching, you know, Nickelodeon, like it's on CNN, you know, because they're asleep. And so I kind of like just do that, you know. So I think that, so I'm telling my story, and I'm also telling other people's stories, because I think at one point, I think that what happens is you run out of your own stories, yet you're a storyteller,
Right.
and then you have to talk about other people's stories. And I think that that's sort of something that I know that's kind of occurred with me. And then, or if you want to talk about something, you ultimately want to like talk about things that are bigger than you, you know.
Right,
and I think that when you start to talk about things that are bigger than you, that's when you start to really like find your voice, I think. You know, there's something about that. And there's something about people's first projects, I think, that are really like the movie Buffalo 66, which is apparently Vincent Gallo's, like, maybe it's his true or fictional story, but like that movie is incredible, you know, like, and it's like his first chance at telling his story, you know, like oftentimes, like, you know, somebody's like first work, you know, or like their first record, or like even somebody like Kendrick Lamar, which is not his first record, but he has this record that he's, I forget the name of it, whatever the current one is. Yeah, that's right, Good Kid, Bad City. Like when I was, you know, I had gotten that, and I was like listening to it, and it's like his like life story kind of Compton, and it's like amazing, you know.
So I think of excerpts from Silver Meadows, actually preceded just by Nymph Daughters. All of your work up until that point, I almost feel like they are studies for what you finally came to. I mean, obviously there was lots of, you know, House Hunting and Outskirts got a lot of critical acclaim, and they're beautiful books, and the photographs in them are, I love them. But it was not until you started weaving in something else, and I want to come back around to how portraiture and landscape each have their own voice with your work. But when you got to, it seems like with Nymph Daughters, you allowed yourself, and we mentioned this before, you mentioned this in a conversation earlier, that because it was published overseas, it was going to be super small distribution, you kind of thought nobody would see it, and it allowed you, maybe talk about that for a second, it allowed you to kind of do something that you hadn't done before.
I think that's really important. So I had this book, Road Divided, which was this landscape book that I had just finished. And then at the same time, there was a Japanese publisher named called Super Labo that asked me to do this little book, and it was going to be an edition of 500, and it was going to be published in Japan. And
remember, this is the one that started with
the
the
very
found
first
photograph of the mother and ended with the car crash.
The dummies. The dummy was the part that he showed, which we'll get to. Like, I think it might be in here again, but this is a sweet project, but we'll talk about something else. But we had, so I had done that. I'm trying to get to that one thing. So this is where now we're caught up. But I'll show it to you in a second. But we they had asked me to do this thing, and everybody this was right around when self-publishing became like cool, you know, like it was like around like 2009, 2010, and they had asked me to do this thing, and I thought, oh, I want to do, because I'd done these like books, like production books that were like, or like trade books or whatever you call them, and they're like hardcover, and there's, you know, 3,000 copies, and they cost $75 and all that, and I really wanted to do something. I saw everybody doing these like little quick one-offs, and I'm like, I knew that there was something in there that I wanted to do, and so they asked me to do it, and so I kind of thought like naively in my head, oh, it's like just 500 copies, and it's going to be in Japan, you know, and you know, like, and
You forgot about the internet.
you know, and I was like, yeah. Then I was like, you know, the next day it was like when they released it, it was like all the like weirdest stuff that I thought of was on the internet, you know, like literally. And I was like, oh my God, like the stuff. And but what was interesting is I'm glad that I was naive, because I thought it was going to be something that nobody saw, and so I totally just went. I just took risk, and I put in things that I wouldn't normally put in, or things that I would had like. You know, I'd had, you know, in my studio, but like I wasn't showing, you know.
Right,
And I think that's interesting to notice. Like I think we all have, like everybody as artists, like we have things that we make, but you don't show, you know. And there's sometimes you make things that are, you know, edgy, but you're not ready for that yet, you know.
Well, and there was a little bit of your public persona that had built up through a series of monographs that were well received, and then almost like an alternate ego that had pulled this together, because there was this found imagery, there were all of the photographs of the models that we hadn't seen in a certain light,
Right.
But putting that together, creating this narrative, it felt very much like a narrative, and that's where that was almost like the novella that then leads to Excerpts from Silver Meadows, which feels, when you look at Excerpts from Silver Meadows, there's to me, there are multiple characters in that book, and I'm not even sure if there is a central character who is traveling down these roads and visiting these homes and meeting these people, or if we are seeing different chapters. There's men in there, there's women, there's found photographs, and I'm curious about about that, like if there is a single narrator or a single character, and the role that landscape plays as a character, geography and place.
Yeah, I think that I think that's all really important. I think that the way that it came, it's kind of curious. I mean, I love what I made in the end, and I think there's I'm just gonna get to it right now. This is a little lead up to it, but we're just going to skip right forward. If you want to hear my full lecture, invite me to your school and you'll hear everything. Okay, so Silver Meadows. These are all the photographs that I made. This is I was basically how I work, like we talked about. I just make pictures. Go out and make pictures. I'm like, you know, just constantly shooting. Like I made some awesome photographs last night. I cannot wait to go home and look at my InDesign or my Lightroom. So I'm addicted to photography, you know, and I'm addicted to that high that you get when you like get one, you're like, oh my God, it's so good. And so I have a lot of images. And so basically, these are pictures that I just would make over time. And one thing that I've learned is that the more you think about it when you're taking pictures, it's not good. You know, it's better to shoot without thinking, and then be free and just make things. And I've kind of come to, it's interesting talking this weekend at Aperture, like I talked for like 14 hours, and I learned all these things. I got to process in my mind, which is why I like to teach, all the things that I learned from making this book, and it was really interesting. But like, so making the pictures and just not thinking about it, and then coming together and then having this pile of imagery. Like these are just what I'm showing you right now is not the sequence of the book, but just this pile of images that I had amassed over a couple of year period of time. And then I had basically, and then when the time came to start to put it together, there was a couple of things at work. One is that I had done that book. I really wish that people could have all those little like one-of-a-kind or those like short-run books, you know, I wish that they could be readily available, but they end up being these rare things that nobody can get, and they sell them for way too much money online now. And basically, so my frustration in making something that was really good, like Nymph Daughters, I thought was like, when I made that little book, it was like a zine, is the best thing I ever made. And it was like just this 24 or 36 page book that was like 8.5 by 11 paper folded in half. But it was the best book I had made. And so I wanted people to see that.
Why was it the best?
Because I didn't think anyone was going to pay attention.
Right.
You know.
You were just freer with yourself.
Exactly. I was freer with myself. I took more risk.
And what you discovered through that risk taking, did you apply that to how did excuse me, how did you apply that to Silver Meadows?
That's exactly where what I did was at first I thought I want people to see this book, and there's another book that I did a long time ago called Ohio. It was just a little book of my 126 Instamatic pictures that I took mostly when I was a kid, and then took some as an adult to fill out what was missing. So there was two things that I wanted to. I always had said to myself, like, the next time I do a book, or if I make a retrospective or whatever, I'm going to like Velcro these two books to the front of the cover, because they precede anything that you're looking at in this book. And I was doing that, and then I was working on this book, and I had this idea. I was like, instead of making, we were actually going to do facsimile copies of those two books and stick them with this book, but then I had the idea of like, let's just do double gatefolds,
right.
You know, and then make the book be a double gatefold. Those like Nymph Daughters is kind of like a double gatefold inside, altered and made better, and then Ohio is another double gatefold that's like, you know, much more complicated than the one that I made 6 years ago, and so. This is interesting. This is like my iPhone tracking me. Like this is called OCD photography. Like I was like, I want to do lakes, and that's me. Like this is me making this book. I'm like, I'm going to go like to Ohio. And I went there many times. I went to Rochester's up on the left. I went there twice because they invited me, and they have a lake there. It looks like Ohio, and so, but that's kind of funny this pops up, because this is kind of like, this is the reality of making images. And then the other reality is sitting in my studio at my house, at my dining room table, and like just sequencing pictures. And so where these things kind of come from is, like that's the pictures I made at the lake, and so I had the idea of doing this, and I love the idea of the gatefold, that like the gatefold is like, that's something that, that it folds. I should have brought this copy of the book, because I wish we had it, but but it opens up, and it's 5 feet long. That we come to the slide of my kids looking at, laying next to the book yet? No, it'll come up. And then we'll get to the real spread. But so I had this, you know, these other ones. I had these two gatefolds filled out, and then I was like, well, what am I going to do with the other ones? You know, and then that's where that other thing starts to come in, where it's beyond me, you know, and then the reason that the book has this kind of, I guess it's kind of like a coat of many colors kind of thing in here, is that it's like, there's, you know, landscape pictures made with a Pentax 6x7. There's pictures that are made with, you know, this is a 6x7, but there's pictures that are made with a 126 camera. There are pictures, and there's pictures made that, they're pictures I found, and I recopied them, and I made them into something. So that's another, like I think that the syntax, the photographic syntax of the way this is all put together is really important, because it's multiple sources, you know, and those multiple sources make it look like there's multiple authors,
right.
You know, and
or multiple voices.
Multiple voices, exactly.
It's very. I mean, you all can kind of see.
Those are just in my head.
There's lots of visual. I want to say like visual languages, visual, you know, photographic languages that are happening, and the work from excerpts from Silver Meadows, as you've said, as you've described, it's really just there's piles and piles of photographs, and any number of edits and sequences could have come out of those piles.
Right.
Ultimately, it is what it is.
Yes.
How do those fragments all add up?
I think that
for
they.
you? And what do they add up to mean?
To me, what they add up to is, I'm going to get to this one little part, and then we're going to be, okay. I have a script usually when I like do this, and these are my cues, and now I can be myself. Okay, this is my living room. This is my dining room table. This is like coming back from Paris, and this is like the research department. Like these are all the books that I bought and thinking about, and then this is the other side of my table, which is all the stuff my piles of pictures I'm going to work with. And then when you're working with something, sometimes you cannot just approach a pile of photographs without an idea. And so that's where this comes into play, and this answers your question. Is I had read this thing by by Robert Adams, who had said he was listening to Dorothea Lange talk, and she said, a photographer should photograph what exists and prevails. And I thought that was, and he liked that, and and if you think about his work, he really did that. He did it like extremely well. He went to Denver, and he made all that work after that, and photographed like what had happened to the American landscape, and that's what he's been doing ever since. And then I started thinking about that, and I'm like, well, gee, I kind of do that too, but like in my head, and I started to think about, but why is fictional? Why is something that's fictional not true? I mean, it is. I mean, in a lot of ways, sometimes like they say, like, give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth. Or Picasso will say. Picasso said that, and he said this. He said, "Art is a lie that tells us the truth." And I think that using that, as I was able to and with this idea of like, what's your book about? In my head, my book's about what exists and prevails. And then I have this idea of that Silver Meadows Boulevard, which is the street that goes through my neighborhood. And then I just started thinking about like what happened to all the people that live there.
So do you feel like it's, I mean, you've mentioned that it's drawing on it's autobiographical on some level, but is it a story, what is it a story about if it's outside of autobiography? What is that story? What is that narrative? What do you want the viewer to get out of that?
I think for me, there's nothing I specifically want to tell them, but there's, I guess, things that I want to suggest, and because I don't think you can tell people things, but I'm not into telling people things. I'm into like making ambiguous pictures that lead people to their own conclusion about what the meaning of it might be. Right. And I think to me, that's more interesting, because I'm not comfortable saying like my work is about, A, B, and C, and you should think, this. I don't work that way.
With some of the voice that you use, there's like what's evident is some of the visual tropes of like Pulp Fiction or pop culture magazines.
Yeah.
Where do you, what are you doing with that?
That kind of stuff I think comes from, that just comes from simply a love of that kind of work. And then I'm very interested in those Pulp Fiction novels, and those little books and stuff like that like 50s kind of like, bad, like ephemera and stuff like that.
But it doesn't feel like you're doing just the exact same thing. It feels like
no.
something else is.
I think I'm using that as, like, for instance, we'll see that there's this section, and there's this character. This is the beginning of the book, and then we go through, and then, for instance, that's that black and white picture on the left is a negative that I found. And then I remember and then a lot of this stuff comes from like 20 years of having stuff. Like, that's a negative that I remember buying off of my friend Molly in grad school. We were picking through like the flea market, and she found that negative of this boy doing something mean to this other boy. And I immediately noticed it, and I'm like, I want that. I was so jealous that she had found that one. And then I ended up buying it from her, like it was $75, and she's like, okay, you can have it, And so I had it, and it sat in my archive literally until 2 years ago. And then I was digging through and looking, and I'm like, this person, there's something about that bully that's interesting. And then, maybe this is the bully's sister, and what I think that's interesting sometimes, when this is something that I actually thought of, is like, sometimes when you put two pictures together, there's a fictional element, like pictures are truth, right? You know,
Right.
or yes or no, and you put them together, and there's fiction, you know. But then this ends up telling a true story in the end. It's kind of a curious, just like puzzle in a way. And then with this, and then the Pulp Fiction stuff comes in with this, as like with that. With this is a model named Christina Kazakova from San Francisco, and she's somebody that I've been working with for a while. And then I had done, this is another example of editorial jobs being like turning into art. Like all editorial people should give jobs to artists, you know, and then they can like go out and make art and then turn it into their work, because it's really perfect. Because I had gotten this one with S Magazine to photograph. They were like, you know, we want you to do a fashion piece, you know, and like I'm not really all that interested in fashion per se, but I'm interested in like I'm interested in playing around and dressing up and having people like, you know, do hair and makeup. And so I had this crew for the first time doing this, and I had a professional like stylist going out and helping me resource, like getting like, oh, that's an actual bra from 1950, you know, and then,
Right.
or like the hair person would come and do. I had a really great crew of people, like, which is interesting because I always work alone when I'm doing my own thing, and then, but when it comes to something like this, I had a crew of people that came together and helped me make stuff, and it was fun for me, and it's really fun for them. Sometimes they still like call me like, hey, we just did all these boring Charles Schwab ads, like, you know, let's shoot Christina next weekend, you know, and so and they're excited because they know they're helping me make something that's meaningful, you know, and they love that, you know, and I love that, and so we basically so Christina, and so that like my interest in Pulp Fiction novels, and then having a model to work with that was the kind of person that could blend into different people very easily, was kind of where that stuff kind of started, you know, and like just working with that and having her be a character. There's the gatefold. That's like the actual book. Those are my kids, Owen and Audrey.
That's good.
The book's like the gatefolds are as wide as two 10-year-olds, tall as two 10-year-olds.
So this just came out from Nazreli Press this past year. Let's, why don't, on that note, let's open it up for questions, because I want to have a chance to hear from
Yeah.
the audience, and then
Did we cover all the things you wanted to cover? There was
more or less,
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
there's always more, but I want to hear from the audience, and that can feed into this. Are there any questions for Todd?
Todd, I just want to say your photos are so good that it's annoying.
Thank you. I'm glad to annoy you.
Yeah,
Yes.
great talk,
Thank you.
great show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Was Larry Sultan's transition from his work with his parents, which was very different from, well, you might even comment whether you think it's very different from the pornography behind the scenes stuff, but it occurred to me while watching your transition, which depending on how familiar people are with your work, could be seen as a very stark difference between some of the more recent portraiture and with the landscape and house hunting stuff. But was it instructive at all to you to see a mentor like Larry Sultan make a jump? For him, it was fairly late in his career. Was it instructive to watch him go through that as you made some aesthetic transitions of your own?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the thing about Larry, the thing I learned about from Larry was that you couldn't just change things. You know, you would have to like really work very hard on making. Well, you couldn't just change. You know, that's one thing, but you can grow. You know, and I think that he very much. I saw him. You know, when I first started working, when I was his student, Pictures from Home had just. That was his most popular first book, called Pictures from Home, the stuff of his father. And those, I kind of met him at the perfect time because the book had come out, he'd done all the shows, there'd been traveling exhibits, and he was sort of done with that work. It was like, and he was like back at school and had time, and he was literally in the middle of like, he was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do next? And it was really interesting to see somebody that was that intelligent. Larry was one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, and so articulate and so emotional. You know, he was a really, he wore his heart on his sleeve, and that was really great. And he would tell you he would tell you about all his problems. Like he'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm thinking about this, and what am I going to do now?" And blah blah blah. And it was really awesome to have that happen because I saw him go from not knowing what he was going to do to making this, transitioning to this whole other body of work that was much deeper, but yet totally connected, because he always said that he made, like at the end of the day, he's like, I make pictures of the suburbs, you know, I like because he grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which is also where all those porn films were made. You know, that was the area where that was happening at that time. And now they're made on your iPhone, but basically, they, you know, and he always said, my work is about the valley, you know, and then at the end of the day, like his like, there was a book that was published, a retrospective book, and it was just called Catherine Avenue, you know, which is the street he grew up on, you know, because that's kind of where everything emanated from. But and I think for me, I think the thing that was important is I saw him kind of not fumble through, because Larry was like, he's not a fumbler, but like try out all kinds of little things, you know, to see, you know, he didn't just get an idea and then go and do it. He just, like, he tried this one thing and it was kind of interesting, but not really. And he's like, oh, I don't like that anymore. And then try something else. And then, you know, and then, you know, he stumbled onto that work and then made that body of work, you know. And then for me, I think that, like, coming out of, like, knowing that just things take time, you know, that was the thing I learned about that, is like, you can't force anything, you know. When you force it, it doesn't work. And if you want to make change in your work, you know, you just have to, like, kind of like do what, you know, the hardest thing to do at that time is to be patient.
Well, and the
and
thing
let
with
it
your,
come.
I feel like you've been presenting, you initially presented something that was something to the world as an artist, as a photographer, that was, here are some homes that I've photographed. It was in a, I don't want to call it the documentary style, but it didn't feel particularly fictionalized.
Yes,
You were out
yes.
there, these were things that existed in front of the camera, you weren't staging anything, you were finding them.
Right.
And your work with the models, which is,
That's
as you
where the
mentioned, it's
fiction-
already
Yeah.
a collaboration. Anytime that somebody
Right.
knows you're making a picture of them, there's staging on some level that starts to happen, whether how conscious that is or not by people is.
Totally.
And then to the thing that is most exciting, I think, to me about these last two books, in a way, is that you are working at creating a fictional narrative. And I'm not saying that you're writing some story and we're supposed to guess what the storyline is. But this
Pictures are language.
It's not a project where you're like, I'm going to go do this thing that is very specific, but your sequencing and editing and all of that allows for so much narrative reading that feels so fictionalized. It's not just a nonfiction essay about some subgroup of America. It's a whole other area, and I don't see a lot of photographers doing that, honestly. And weaving in both archival and work with models and landscapes and all of that.
Right.
It has all of the characters of a novel, in a way.
Yeah. And I think for me, like, I think that's, I mean, it's in a weird way that it's kind of like, those are the things, like all the things I like to take pictures of, you know, end up in this book. And then when I start to put them together, that's when you know, like these things, and even like this, you know, that little heart thing, which is like something that's like, you know, it's like some creepy thing that like some serial killer made. Like, I made that, you know, like I made, and then I remember, this is really important, and where I got that from is like, there was an assignment that we have always had at CCA in the first year graduate students do this assignment, and I did this, you know, because I was a first year grad student that was, you know, in '94, called the alter ego assignment, where you basically, you need to go and you need to make work that's somebody else's work, you know. So you think of some other person and you go and you make their photographs. And then when it came to, like, you know, I needed, like, when I was making that book, Nymph Daughters, I was interested in I needed some like weird things to put in there. And so I just went and photographed things, and like I was like, and I painted a heart on this thing, and, you know, with my iPhone, I put it on my iPhone, you know, and then printed it out on Xerox paper and then spray painted it. And I was like, wow, what am I doing? I have spray paint. I'm going to buy pink spray paint, you know, like at the art store. It's like, this is who the hell am I? You know, it's like, and I liked that. I thought that was fun, you know. And then when I did that one, I was like, you know, wanted to do more of it. And then so I started to experiment more with like what you could make. And then this one, this is an interesting little thing that we'll let this cue right in, because this is a weird one, which is probably one of the.
And these are spreads from the books.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that right?
These, what when there's all that space, we're all spreads to the book right now. That's where we are. This is the actual spreads to the book. And so, this guy, who's this guy? Like, every so often when you're like making a book, you have almost everything together, and I literally, I sequence these pictures and move them around thousands of times. Like just thousands of times, like just shuffling like back and forth. And then you finally get to something where it's kind of locked in, and then there's holes. And I had a hole here, and the hole was that we saw those pictures of my dad. There's some photographs that were from Ohio, and there's pictures of a football player. And then that's my father, and that's the spread that's autobiographical. That's like the real thing,
Even though we don't really know that at all. We don't know that at all.
Yeah, well, see, that's the other thing. Yeah, you'd have to read the essay to know that, But and the essay, by the way, is if you buy my book, read that essay, because the woman that wrote it, Katya Talyevic, she wrote just the most amazing thing. She went with me to take pictures and hung out for 3 occasions, and she got. If there was one person that could sum up what I do in a piece of writing, she got it perfect, So please read it. And then, but anyway, so I had been wanting to. Ohio stuff, and then I wanted to, and I needed. So my dad was in there. My dad was an antagonist, and I saw him as an antagonist in that part of the story. Yeah, because there's he's like a football player, and he's got his medals, and then he's drunk with a keg, in one picture, and he's holding my brother, by the arm with his diploma from his college graduation at Kent State, and the other one he's these are my accomplishments, take my picture,
Right.
And so there's those. So he's an antagonist, and then.
And what's the hole?
Oh, and then there's
As you're
holes in the wall, punched holes in the wall,
Right.
just, capturing the mood of where I grew up.
Right,
And
right.
Even though I took that picture in some other place, but it's real. See, that's the perfect that's not my house, but that's my house.
Right.
And but basically, so then I came to this point where I had a clear spot where I was there's something lacking, and so I needed a male. It had to be a man. It could not be a woman. And so this friend of mine's oh, you can photograph my husband. He looks really creepy when he slicks his hair back, and and he was totally into it. And then I went to their house, and we hung out in their basement, and he put on a wife beater, and I lit him from underneath. And then we have this, but there was still something missing. And so this is where this comes from, is I had done this previous piece with my daughter, Audrey. I needed a rainbow on this picture it's a long story as to why, but I needed a rainbow. And so she did it, and I loved it.
Does this relate to the pink spray paint? Or?
It does. Well, it does. The pink spray paint is me doing something, and then she did this, and then I had her do this. And this is a little
Audrey, did you help me make this?
a little video.
Yes, I did.
Was it fun?
Yes, I did.
How did
That was
fun? How did that pretty little face make this gnarly looking dude?
I made this because my dad really wanted to draw on this, and see this little print. I made this fingerprint.
Oh my God, that's
My heel.
cool.
And I did a nose, eyebrows, earrings.
So and this is another thing that's interesting. When you're going for it, how do you know how far to go? And I think that I'm joking with my assistants is you don't know where the line is until you cross it. And it's true. I mean, I think that's true. It's you make things, and this comes back to making things. Or if you're not doing this, you should make things that you don't let anybody see, because that will allow you to kind of cross the line, and then you reel it back in, and I shared that with you, but I would never publish that thing. That little picture is horrific. And so but she made it, and then I'm like, hey, why don't you try this out, or why don't you try this out, and then ultimately we got to that one that was this. And it just said, I was saying, oh, the guys, I said, we got to name the guy. And I was like, let's call him Wayne. And then she said, Mean Wayne. And I was like, yeah, write that on the picture. And so that's kind of how this character came out. And so you said, are there characters in the book? There's many characters. You know, he's one of them, you know. And then is he fictional? Like, yeah, he's fictional. But like, unfortunately, I have to say, that little scenario there of like the house, there's a man that's mean, and there's a woman that is not, you know, that's kind of down and out, and then there's a child involved in that because the child wrote on the picture. That's really complicated and it's really sad, but it's like what exists and prevails in modern America. And so in that weird little way, like, is my book fictional or true, you know?
Right.
Yes, and it's both,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Karen.
Can you talk a little bit more about, in the beginning you talked so much about the viewer, how your images, it's really important for you that it be something that the person sort of brings the photograph. But this work to me is very different. Like, it's not really about the viewer in a way at all. I'd be interested to hear how you kind of see the viewer and how they react.
Well, the thing that's kind of, the thing that, this is where kind of things shift, is that like, when you're making pictures of, that's why my work changed drastically when people entered the work, you know, because all of a sudden, if you just have a road or a landscape or a house and you don't show anybody being there, then you have to figure out, so you know someone's there and then you make that person up. But then when I decide who's going to be there and show it to you, then it changes everything, you know, and I think that it becomes more about, you know, this question about like, are you making work in the first person or third person or whatever? It's like, you know, like these are all, they're all characters that somehow come. I know all these people, you know, like, you know, and then, or though somebody like there's like, or I'll think of a Cat Power song, you know, like that's like she's talking about something from, you know, her childhood, and like she's writing this song about something, and I'm like, God, that's really like reminds me of like the apartments at Silver Meadows, you know,
Right.
like stuff like that. And so it's sort of like, and again, like I honestly, like I can't tell you how, I mean, this is honestly influenced by CNN, you know, literally, I'm not kidding. Like there's no question that this is, that's a part of it, you know, and then this sex and crime,
Right.
America's favorite breakfast diet.
Kara, you said that you don't feel like the viewer is, it's not made for the viewer. Is that?
More like you're leading the viewer on a very specific road. Like you're leading the person, almost like a novel or a film or something narrative. It's fictional where like you're telling us and taking us through the story, and you're just not giving us all this information. Whereas before it was more like, here's an empty window, you can't really see inside. It's up to you to make up the story. Like you have the story here.
Yeah.
Story, and you are creating that. And we just are there to sort of follow.
Or at least the central character in the novel is leading us on some story with Todd as the author or something like that. Yeah, no, it's,
And I think that just inevitably, like, you have to grow, you know? Like, I think if I had just kept doing, if I just kept suggesting things, then I would be bored, you know, eventually,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And then,
are there other questions? Do we have any others? Yeah, over here.
hello.
It feels like in your work there's an element of danger, but there's also an element of comfort. And I'm thinking specifically in so many of the house photographs, there's this ominous, uncanny feel to them. But ultimately, these are families and whatever support and comfort a family provides. And then in this series with the model Christina, she's this kind of seductress femme fatale, but she's also kind of this, you know, very young girl, and there's a headstone that says mother and the sign that says Lover's Lane. So could you talk a little about the tension between those two elements in your work?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. It's funny you locked in on the mother grave, because that was the one. That ended up getting cut. That part I cut that out because that was too heavy. That one. But I like that you're perceptive to notice that. When you look at the book, that's the one piece that changed. But yeah, there's something about like especially with her in particular, is that she's in that sequence there, like, you know, like she's, you know, tempting you, and then at the end of it, in the beginning, she's tempting you, and at the end of it, she's this ice cold, like person that's not there. Or on one side, she's, you know, saying, "Hey, what's up?" And on the other side, she's like this scary person in the car, you know, that drank too much. You know, maybe it's my dad, but it's funny that. How that works, and I think that, like with the houses, I mean, I like that those things, like that slide I showed about that with the like the home and hearth thing, where it's like, you know, the lights draw you in. They say, "Hey, come on inside and look," and then you get in there and it's something completely different going on. And I think that I like that it's like push and pull kind of, you know, like it's like back and forth, and you don't know whether you should. And there's some things where, like those pictures of my father, that are really the real photographs of my dad, like at his graduation. People don't know whether to laugh or not, you know, at those. And I like that. That's a way where I think that the viewer can make up their own decision on that kind of thing, you know. And then, you know, and it all depends on what you're bringing to the picture too, you know.
There was another question up here. Yeah.
I just wanted to know, do you ever get any juice from watching true crime TV shows like Dateline or I Survived, and the way they use kind of archival images and, you know, these kind of third-person perspective of old homes and possible homes that the families may have lived in?
Yeah, it's interesting to see those. There's sometimes that kind of stuff, but it's more like, for me, I think it's more from actual news, you know, or just digging through old magazines and stuff like that. You know, but that's where that comes from. Yeah.
I think we have time for
Or
maybe
this
one more question. if there
Hitchcock
is one.
is a big influence.
Hi. Kind of interested in the demographic of the women that you shoot. To me, they kind of look alike, you know, in terms. Maybe I haven't seen the full range, but like, can you talk about that? Is that a conscious decision, or if you're inspired from, you know, CNN or just
Yeah,
magazines?
I think really like that they relate. Ironically, that a lot of like there's the model Christina is actually in a lot of the book, but with a wig on, you know. So that explains, yeah, the blonde one and the brunette, the short like 50s one, and then I think that the demographic comes from, it's what I know. Like that part for sure is like from these are the people I know or remember, or, you know, like that stuff's totally coming from me, you know, like the demographic and you know, the reason that it's not so broad is because it's kind of in this weird way from this one little street, you know. Yeah, that's made in the 70s. That's probably totally different now, but in my mind, it's like 1986 when I left it. You know what I mean? So I think that's a big part of that. So it's not a super broad demographic, you know. Yeah. Here's one thing that's interesting to look at is like, you know, in terms of like how, like something I think about that's interesting is like when you show you have a body of work and how you present it becomes different in different contexts. You know, these are installation shots of this show at the Transformer Station in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a new photography museum that's run by Fred and Laura Bidwell. And this is something that I did also. That was this book and this is one of the things where I'm like, I do everything, you know, and which I like that approach, but not always, you know. It's fun to, I love having somebody, like handing a pile of pictures to somebody and saying, okay, I'm done, you know, and then I'm really done. But then sometimes when I'm really going for it like this is, and so I wanted to do, and there's my dad as the football player. Like this is essentially that Ohio spread, the gatefold in there. And parts of it are totally true and real and actually authentic, you know, like from my father's scrapbook. And then other parts of it are made up, like that Say When part. You know, that's a book, like, that's not really my mother, but, you know, it looks like her, you know. And then, and so that's part of that. And then here's just another couple of installation shots. This is like the spread of Christina, one of those first ones. And it's really interesting to figure out what to highlight in an exhibit versus what to highlight in a book, because it changes, you know, like what looks good on a wall doesn't really, you can't just, there's no such thing as translating them, just like, here's the map, put it up, you know, it's like, no, like, here's like, I very carefully thought about which ones would be good big, which ones would be good small. I went to the gallery like 5 days before the show opened, and I figured it out there, standing in the room. There's another one. There's Fred Bidwell looking at my vitrine of my paraphernalia of bookmaking. And then there's that one. And these are really different. There's what's the inside. And then here's something else. These are things I love. This is something that kind of came out of this. Is like, I love graphic design. And I always look at these old movie poster books and stuff. And the designer that worked on this project with me, his name is Bob Awfuldish. You spell it A-U-F. I forget, I can't spell it because I can't think like that, but like, he's an amazing designer. He's really incredible. And it's a German name. And we had made and he's always up for stuff. And then the Bidwells had said, you know, we'd love to make a little poster we can sell as a promotional thing, like for $10 or whatever. And I was like, let's make 8 of them instead, you know. And they were like, what, 8? And I'm like, no, let's make them cards, like these 12 by 16 cards. So we did these posters that are kind of based on, you know, like totally like riffing off of like Hitchcock posters. You know, this one says, I've missed you, you know. And then, you know, there's this. And then our postcards for My Happy Past. And then this one says, starring Christina Kavakova, Mean Mean Wayne, Barry Heido, and Mary Heido. You know, it's like, I mean, it's funny, right? Okay, there's that one. Whoops, am I going the wrong way? I think they're repeated. Oh, this one's good. This one just says, fuck yeah. The thing I like about the Bidwells is they like encourage that kind of activity, and then, you know, and I'm like, you guys are so awesome. And then this one says, I have an insatiable appetite for looking.
That's good.
Yeah, that's
Why
a
don't
good
we
one.
end there?
That's a good one to end on. Yeah, thank
you
you
so
very
much
much.
for hanging in there.
Thank you.